الحضور الأعزاء من فضلكم الجلوس. الجلسة التالية ستبدأ بعد قليل.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We hope you had a very good and sumptuous lunch. For those who have just joined us, welcome to the 6th World Conference on Islamic Thought and Civilization with the theme Sharing Our Humanity. We thank you and appreciate your presence and participation. Our next session is on economic models of stability and sustainability. This session will be moderated by the Honorable Prof. Dato Dr. Ahamed Kameel, Mydin Meera, who happens to be Mydin, Prof. And now the conference would like to invite our distinguished panelists, Dr. Muhammed Abdul Khalid and Dato Dr. Ui Ki Beng, together with Professor Dato Dr. Ahmed Kameel to the stage.
ندعو المتحدثين إلى الأمام.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Is it clear?
Yes.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad an-Nabiyyil Ummi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. So dear participants of the conference, WCIT conference, this is welcome to section 2. Before that, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everyone and a good afternoon. Today we have two distinguished speakers for this session. As you can see, it's on economic models of stability and sustainability. Yeah? So before I give to our distinguished panelists here, so just for the interest of participants, who are, some of them are students here, so let me just give a brief this thing to stability and sustainability. So in economic, what do you call that, terms, when we say stability, something like balance. The term is something is balanced, something that is not too volatile, right? So we call that stability, stable. So economic stability here, generally we are referring to, let's say, less of, not too much of inflation, and also there's not recessionary, not too much of recessionary or pronounced business cycles, right? And there must be economic growth and well-distributed income. So in overall, if you are, let's say, a rakyat, right? A rakyat, when you say that the economy is stable, so it's also referring to, your access to economic networks. Your access to economic networks. So what are economic networks? For example, education, health, food, housing, utilities, air dengan electric, right? Then telecommunication, transportation. So if you get all these things, generally then you will feel happy about it. And if it's always there, then we say the economy is stable. If this is disrupted, then you will find that it is economy is not stable. Yeah. So for stability, you also need political stability. So if there's no political stability, then there may be orang gaduh, or there'll be, riots and so forth. Then there'll be no peace and harmony, right? So you need all these factors for you to talk about stability, stable. So what is the sustainability then? The Malay word for sustainability is mampan lah, mampan, yeah. So sustainability, it is basically still stability, but for the longer period. For the longer period. That means it's always there. That means that not only the present generation can enjoy the economic growth and but also the later generations. So, so what has happened recently? If you notice in United Nations, they have come up with 17 Sustainable Development Goals, right? So there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals that you basically we need to find out why these areas have become unsustainable. Maybe our panel speakers will tell us in a moment. So that's basically to give you a brief background to economic stability and sustainability. So the two distinguished speakers we have here, they are very experienced people. You might have seen them often on TV and so forth, yeah? So the first speaker here on my left is Dato Dr. Ooi Kee Beng, yeah? Dato Dr. Ooi Kee Beng is an executive director of Penang Institute. So Penang Institute is like a think tank for Penang, for the state of Penang, right? So, and Dato Ooi Kee Beng has been studying the process of nation building in Asia and analyzing Malaysian politics over the last 3 decades, yeah? And he was appointed Executive Director of Penang Institute in 2017, that was 5 years ago. And he received his PhD in Sinology from Stockholm, Stockholm University, Sweden. So before returning to the region, he worked at Ericsson Electronics in Sweden for 22 years during the heydays of the company's mobile phone era. So while studying in Stockholm University. So courses that he taught at Stockholm included Chinese history, then Chinese philosophy and general knowledge of China. So his major academic interests were in language, philosophy, and ancient Chinese political and strategic thinking. And he joined Singapore's Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, yeah? Now known as ISIS or Yusof Ishak Institute, in 2004, becoming its deputy director from 2011 to 2017. So he writes regular opinion pieces for regional and global mass media on Malaysian matters and regional matters. These have been compiled in 7 separate volumes. Many of these works can be accessed at from the website. And he was the visiting associate professor at the City University of Hong Kong from 2009 to 2012. An adjunct professor at the National University of Singapore's Department of Southeast Asian Studies from 2009 to 2011. And he is the founder, editor of Penang Monthly and Issues, what do you call that, issued by Penang Institute, and ISIS Perspective. All right, these are the publications produced by Dato Ooi. So he's also the series editor for Trends in Southeast Asia, also by ISIS. So without any further ado, I'll call upon Dr. Ooi Kee Beng to present his, all right?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm sorry it was a bit long, but if you live long enough, your biodata gets a bit long as well. Thank you everyone for coming back after lunch. I know it's a bit difficult, right? After lunch usually, and after a very, very interesting morning session, I thought. Anyway, let me start by thanking the organizers of the 6th World Congress of Islamic Thought and Civilization, University Sultan Aslan Shah, for inviting me to speak at this event. I was a speaker here in 2013, I think, already, and I have very fond memories from that event of the warm hospitality shown me by everyone back then. In fact, I shall have very fond memories of the warm hospitality shown me this time around as well. So thank you, everybody. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a historian more than a political scientist. So my take on economic models of stability and sustainability, the name of this session, is going to be very much a comparative and historical talk, and not very much about economics, really. On economics, I leave it to the able hands of my fellow panelist, Dr. Muhammad Khalid, whom you all know very well, one of the foremost economic analysts in the country, really. Now, the title, Economic Model of Stability and Sustainability, for my talk, I would, as you see here, I call it socio-political stability and socio-economic stability, sustainability. Not very much about the environment, I'm afraid, but you know, I think stability is largely political and sustainability is largely economic as well. But the social bit is always necessary. Now, there are three sections to my talk today. They might get a little academic, but I'll try to, you know, talk slowly, perhaps, just so that I don't throw too many new concepts at you. I shall first dwell briefly on certain aspects of modern global history. Then I shall consider some factors that are generally important to political stability and economic growth. And the last part, there I shall try to relate these ideas to the Malaysian context. So let me introduce some perspectives that I have found to be illustrative of modern global history, from having studied Malaysian history, European history, and East Asian history for the last 30 years. Now, first of all, in all cases of national modernization, a revolution took place. Upheavals tended to take place in one form or another. Some of these were very violent, some less violent. In all cases, what one should rightly call a cultural revolution took place. And many of these cultural revolutions would drag on for a long time. The gist of it is society as a whole had to change, sometimes quickly, sometimes step by step. The economic structure had to change, the political system had to change, everything had to change. That is what modernization has always meant. In Japan, we know of the Meiji Restoration, for example. That was indeed a cultural revolution, one that was started from the top in the name of the emperor, and in desperate response to external pressures being perceived as life-threatening by the Japanese, and for fear that cultural stubbornness and lethargy on the part of traditional Japanese society would allow those external threats to turn deadly. This creation of modern Japan, in effect a civil war, began already in 1868. Now, at the same time, over in Europe, the top-down creation of the modern state of Germany was established only in 1871 under Prussian dominance. These were indeed revolutionary times, ignited by the French Revolution, heightened by the Napoleonic Wars, and inspired further by subsequent upheavals. That period also saw the emergence of Italy as a united kingdom by 1871. Now, one can go through each of the many countries in Europe and identify revolutionary policies and events taking place, which came to lay the foundations of the modernity of each one of them. In Japan, it was the arrival of the Americans in the form of Commodore Matthew Perry, who was there to force an end to Japanese, to Tokugawa isolationism, and that was what led to the Meiji Restoration. Now, across the East China Sea, it was the Opium Wars that the British started in the late 1830s and the sacking of Beijing in 1860 by British and French soldiers that forced the Qing Empire to attempt modernization in some of its institutions. But the bigger you are, the harder you fall. So all the many attempts failed, and China's dynastic system fell apart in 1911, 70 years after the first shots in the Opium War were fired in Canton. Now, back in those days, if you think back to that time, it would have been quite unbelievable for the celestial empire of China to suddenly become a republic, and then a people's republic. Now, that is a cultural revolution indeed. My reason for talking about the 19th century is to highlight how difficult, how painful, and how costly the entrance into modern statehood and into modern economics was for everyone, without exception. And in many ways, that still is the case. In that sense, the whole of humanity is in the same boat, and has been so for the last 200 years or so. And also, we should not, for a second, believe that the Atlantic nations, who often came out on top in our descriptions of history, that they were spared their own cultural conflicts. They were not. They had the English Revolution, they had the French Revolution, they had the American Civil War, the First World War. Some say the First World War, a war in the First World, but the First World War, the Second World War, all these were acts in a protracted play that we today call globalization. And the tensions from those days remain, and the wars continue. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I come to the second part of my talk. What insights can we gain? What insight can we gain from all these cases, from this selective foray by me into modern global history? We see that Western Europe, after the Second World War, largely settled on the welfare state model to a large extent. And even if that model has weakened in recent years, its ideas and habits of thought remain strong. Those ideas, at the same time, never really took hold in the United States. While capitalism was allowed to run wild in the United States, the European model since the Second World War has generally relied on, one, a strong interventionist state, democratic processes, high taxation and broad redistribution of wealth, tripartitism for industrial peace, and the last point is usually forgotten, the NATO defense umbrella. What about other parts of the world? What about our part of the world? Now, in China, after the fall of the Qing Empire in 1911, intellectuals naturally studied the West. And they often did that through studying how the Japanese had studied the West. Many modern concepts you find in China were coined by the Japanese first. In any case, the Chinese identified two entities. The Chinese intellectuals of the time, they identified two entities to acquaint themselves with. They call this Mr. Sai and Mr. Te. Sai is Chinese short for science, and Mr. Te was short for democracy. Now, so they were saying that what China needed to learn was science and democracy at the same time. I think that it is more to the point, though, to say that it was scientism and democratism that they realized that they needed to get to know. What was needed were changes in the mindset of everyone in society, everyone in Chinese society, from the emperor to the peasants. And scientism, now, let me see. Scientism involves thinking in material and rational terms of understanding knowledge as experimentally informed and eternally tentative. Democratism is more than just being about putting formal democratic rules and processes into place. It is really individual integrity and sense of belonging and agency, about social fairness, and about equality among individuals. Now, Mr. Sai represents modern knowledge and the economic strength that grows from it, while Mr. Te promised political legitimacy and a fairer and more effective way of administering society. What the Chinese scholars of the 20th century did not give enough thought to was the issue of security. Modernization was also very much about securing your borders and acquiring domestic peace, resisting foreign threats on one hand and uniting the people on the other was very much part of the equation. So my point here is modernization is always a state-driven matter. The state has to control and develop its territories and its people while defending these from external threats. This is the key project of a modernizing state. And so, outside the Atlantic models of rampant capitalism and the welfare state, we saw experimentations with communism like in China and Vietnam. We saw militarism like in pre-war Japan, and in many Southeast Asian countries after independence, even today, in Myanmar, for example, and in Thailand to an extent, and various types of authoritarian and semi-authoritarian systems, as in Latin America and Africa, and of course in Southeast Asia in earlier times. So in studying global cases, we end up with these three words: scientism, democratism, and security. Today, humanity is at a painful and hopeful point, but hopeful point in time, where all nations are trying to determine common rules for relations between nations. In principle, the idea is that all nation states, big and small, are equals on the world stage. And furthermore, one point that was mentioned by Professor Saad earlier today, in trying to create stable international relations, we now rely very much on international trade itself. And over the last 50 years or so, we have seen that it is thanks to international trade, the win-win situation that international trade can provide, that has given us a relatively peaceful period in human history. And so we see why the speakers earlier today were all worried about what is happening to globalization and the turning back of globalization, as it were, because it involves certain reversals of international trade and international networks, and that we are afraid might lead us back into a period of war and conflicts. Now, as I said, the role and the quality of the state is vital, and that role and quality can be studied through three intertwined processes, to my mind, and these are nation building, state building, and national economy building. Now, nation building tends to get bogged down with issues of citizenship, of language, national schooling, majority-minority standoffs, and a determination of what national identity is. State building, on the other hand, involves the establishing of institutions, the securing of their integrity, the maximizing of synergy between them, and the efficacy and rationality of their processes and authority. National economy building involves the growing of wealth, the redistribution of wealth, the development of a globally competitive citizenry, a fiscal system that controls its own currency and that protects and manages the collective wealth of the nation, and so on and so forth. Now, there's a reason why we call our countries nation states today, right? That's something that I think everyone should look into, why nation state. But I would break it down into nation and state because I think where ideas are concerned, they are quite different matters. So balancing nation building with state building and national economy building are the three responsibilities that a modern statesman is supposed to deal with. Sorry. So here I attempt as model for development, and I think it involves the following. First, a process that regularly throws up effective leaders who are capable of taking on these three responsibilities. That is what democracy is to do. Number two, channels of education that develop citizens capable of participating and thriving in the global economy, well-versed in scientific thinking and technological innovations. Today, this clearly involves understanding of the environment as well, and that is where scientism comes in. Third is governance. Governance that maximizes the security of the country. I think this term should never be underestimated. History tells us that security of a country is key to everything else. You get governance right, you get a stable government into place, then the rest can follow. Otherwise, the rest cannot really follow. So governance, good governance, that includes domestic security, meaning the creation of a united citizenry, alongside good international ties. So, ladies and gentlemen, I now come to my final part. What has all this got to do with Malaysia? Well, everything, actually. We have been a battleground, Malaysia. We have been a battleground between capitalism and communism. In fact, that struggle continues to affect the political discourse in the country 70 years after the end of the emergency. For example, today we talk more about race than about class. And this is very unlike in most other countries where class is very often central to analysis of politics and economics. But I think in the case of Malaysia, that has been played down thanks to how, well, due to the 1950s and due to how Malaysia came into being, where the discussion of class tended to quickly fall into talk about communism. Now in Malaysia, since the very beginning, we have actually implemented many welfare measures throughout our history, as can be seen in our affordable national health service, our national school system, and so on. Now, the money politics that now passes for welfare should not detract from the fact that Malaysia actually had it very clear in their head, our founding fathers, that certain elements of social democracy were very, very important to the stability, the socio-economic stability of the country. Now, Malaysia has been lucky where security matters are concerned. No serious security problem has presented itself after the confrontation with Indonesia ended in 1966. Of course, we can say this could have been due to other reasons. The big powers like England and America and Australia came in to make sure that this part of the world where Malaysia is in, the southern part of Southeast Asia, would remain rather stable and unthreatened by communism. And also, the new economic policy from the 1970s was clearly a leftist attempt at correcting very deep issues in the hodgepodge federation that Malaysia actually is. But this was spared to the politics of majoritarianism that often characterizes democracy in the post-colonial world. I think this needs to move on towards being about citizenship rights and about social inclusiveness rather than anything else. So for Malaysia, where scientism and democratism are concerned, the struggles have been obvious. We have calls for reforms in education all the time, we hear this, and for reforms in the electoral system and governance as well. These are common, these are persistent, and I think this will continue even in the coming elections. So one can connect this back to common issues that most countries have had to deal with in trying to modernize themselves. In education and in democratism, which I would reduce to an attempt to create a citizenry that is fair. That would be the gist of what I mean by democratism. Now, what I have experienced having lived in many different countries in my life is that developed countries, such as Germany or Japan or the Scandinavian countries, have populations that are very science conscious. And in their history of nation building, there was always a point when they decided to invest greatly in scientific education. I cannot stress this point enough. Modernity is based on scientific rationality and technological innovativeness. Democratism, in turn, is about the maturing of a society living within a technically democratic system. We see that happening in Malaysia, perhaps at a pace that is too slow for most of us, but it is happening. What the deeply interventionist direction taken since the 1970s by the state has meant in the long run, what it means in the long run is for priority to have been put greatly on nation building rather than on state building. The discourse of nation building rather than state building has left our state institutions rather weak over the decades and left them weak and highly compromised by politics. And our economic policies are too concerned with big projects rather than with socioeconomic dynamics and potential. At this point, I think we should see that technocratic processes need to be strengthened in Malaysian governance, and the alternative is an excessive bureaucratizing and paralyzing of administrative processes throughout the system, something that was mentioned quite poignantly today, earlier in the morning session. Now, connected to that, we should not forget that Malaysia was born as a federation, and that was done for very good reasons. Malaysia is very diverse, very multicultural, and excessive centralization over the decades has weakened the spirit of the Constitution on this matter. This has led to much unhappiness at the state level and to inefficiencies in economic planning and in governance and policy formulation and implementation. Lastly, the history of national security in Malaysia has provided us with a powerful police system, reforms to which have been called for several decades already. I think this was mentioned as well earlier today. This, I think, is part and parcel of the need for us today to shift our focus from nation building to state building. I think I've gone past my time, but I'll end with this one last slide. Yeah? It highlights certain shifts I think are needed in Malaysian policy making and discourse. We need more citizen welfare and less race consciousness. We need more education and less schooling. We need more democratism and less democracy. And by democracy here, I mean the rituals of elections and whatnot. We need more state building and less nation building. We need more federalism and less centralism. And we need more system credibility and rule of law through police reforms. Now, these are issues, these are very big issues, and we could discuss this for hours. But I think I'll stop now and wait for the Q&A and further discussion with my panelists. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Wee. Thank you so much. So that was Dr. Wee's presentation on a historical perspective of nation building. Yeah. So participants, so far you have not been given any chance to ask questions. So I'll ask a few questions now. But after our next speaker presents, inshallah, then I will let all of you ask as many questions as you like for half an hour, okay? So you will get the chance to ask questions. But before I go to the next speaker, just one question, Dr. Wee. In nation building, I think I mentioned to you something yesterday, but for the interest of the audience here, yeah? You see, in nation building, one of the major problems that we are facing today in many countries is the shrinking population, remember? The population of many nations, for example, Singapore, you can look at Japan, you can look at South Korea, almost the entire Europe. You find that these countries are all facing shrinking population. So when you face this problem, what happens is that along the way, then you will face shortage of labor force for almost every sector in the economy. Every sector in the economy will face shortage of labor force. That's one of the reasons why even Japan is speeding up its robotics. So you go to a restaurant, a robot will come and serve you. You go to a hotel, the receptionist is a robot, you know. So you face that kind of thing because they don't have, they're facing this shortage of labor force. And if you remember, even Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, Arwah again, so in his book, he mentioned that the number one problem for Singapore is the shrinking population, right? So my question is, how do you think, this problem can be addressed from your understanding of historical perspective of things?
Well, the problem differs. I mean, every country is going to experience that problem sooner or later. I think as development comes, families become smaller, and then sooner or later you're going to have this problem. But I think Malaysia, I'm sure we're going to have this problem quite soon, but not as bad yet, I think.
Yeah.
So we still do have an advantage compared to certain countries where it's really
Bad,
really bad. Well, the obvious, I don't think anyone has a real answer to it, but what governments are trying to do, of course, is to go for digitalization. Even in Penang, my favorite nasi kandar stall now, after COVID, they serve me with a robot. There's a robot that serves me, the nasi kandar shop, because they can't have labor. But part of that problem is due to foreign workers not being able to get in, I think. So it's not a problem of the type that they're talking about. At the same time, we of course, when we talk about nation building, nation state building and all that, there's a limit to that approach to an analysis because economics nowadays is largely regional, if not global. So when we look at the nation and talk about national solutions, some of the solutions are offered by, if one thinks of economics as a regional matter. A lot of our economic problems are regional problems. So let's say Penang houses get bought up and Penang, and the prices rise up. That's because we're comparing the wealth of Malaysians to the wealth of Singaporeans or Hong Kong people who can buy up Penang easily. So the housing market, if not properly controlled, is a regional issue. So many of our problems should not be stared at only as a national problem. Some of the causes of them, and I think many of the solutions may come if we look at things as a regional issue. Yeah.
Thank you, Dato. Actually, we from the a group called Movement for Monetary Justice. We do have kind of a suggested solution to that, but that will be probably in another forum. That we think that the issue lies in the structure of the monetary system itself, because the current monetary system, what it causes is that it causes probably the next speaker will highlight that. It causes, the continuous rise in the present monetary system, It causes a continuous rise in prices. That means the cost of living goes up. It also causes the increase in debt, people to become indebted. That means hutang lah. So you'll find the household debt rising. You'll find business loan, the debt also rising. And you'd also find the government loan also rising. Almost in any country. So if individuals, businesses, and the government, everyone is becoming highly indebted, then the cost of living is rising. Then your cost of retirement also rises because of that. So in Malaysia also the EPF money, most of them, it can only last for 5 years only when you retire. So the having children becomes an opportunity cost for retiring comfortably later. Even the housing also more expensive, unaffordable housing. Even Malaysia is severely unaffordable already, according to the Khazanah Research Institute, right? So what happens is that if it is difficult to own a home, you are becoming increasingly indebted, then it is difficult to retire comfortably. So you tend to have less children. In some countries, in Japan, in South Korea, many youngsters, they do not even want to get married. So you will find in the future, the more you are linked to the present monetary system, this is what I found, that it happens. So in nation building that you are saying, and in relation to our topic of today, sustainability, so this will become a major problem. especially for the labor force, sustainability of the labor force in the future. Yeah. So this is one thing. Perhaps
may I jump in?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Since we're talking about sustainability and largely environmental sustainability, there's a sort of paradox here. When populations start to shrink, we think that's a problem, right? Economic problem. But when populations continue to grow, then we have an environmental problem, because we are eating up the earth, as it were.
Not necessary.
You know, so where sustainability is concerned, I'm sure a lot of green warriors out there would think, well, a smaller population is not that bad. But in economic terms, we see that this is going to lead to recession and all that. But over the last 100 years, 200 years, I think the human innovativeness is rather good. I mean, we tend to be able to solve a lot of problems. So perhaps an economist would have more to say about how perhaps a new approach to how we look at the figures.
Correct. That's why nowadays, Doctor, I mean, we also now talk about the circular economy and things like that, right? So where the word waste, we do not want to call it waste anymore. We say something is waste when we do not know its position in the cycle of things. So once you know what you can do with the waste, then the waste becomes a wealth, a goal. So now the new economic models, they're talking about circular economy, where the waste also goes back into the cycle of things. Yeah. So these are, different models that we can think about how to solve the human problems of today, because we are facing major issues currently in the world. We have 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and then we have a war coming between this thing. There's a possibility of a dollar crisis happening, and that can, become a global crisis. If the dollar crisis will become a global crisis. So we are in a very precarious situation currently globally. So let's see from our next economist, who's very famous, what he has to say about all this. Yeah. So our next speaker, by the way, is Dr. Muhammed Abdul Khalid. You all know him. He is very popular. He appears very often in TV. Now he is in the Board of Trustees of Malaysian Institute of Economic Research, MIER, and former economic advisor to Prime Minister. So he's a former economic advisor to Prime Minister. Okay. And Dr. Khalid is currently a research fellow at Institute of Malaysia and International Studies, IKMAS, and University Kebangsaan Malaysia, and adjunct professor at the Center for Policy Research and International Studies, CENPRIS, at University Science Malaysia. And he was formerly the economic advisor to the former Prime Minister Tun Mahathir Mohamad, and member of the Economic Action Council chaired by the Prime Minister from 2018 to 2020. And Dr. Muhammad is the chairman of Alliance General Insurance, Malaysia, Berhad, and member of the Board of Trustees of Malaysian Institute of Economic Research. I just mentioned it earlier, yeah? And member of the Honorary Council of Advisors at the European Malaysian Chamber of Commerce. He has served as consultant to the World Bank, United Nations Malaysia, UNICEF, UNFPA, UNESCO, and UNHCR. So he was also a senior technical advisor at the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP Malaysia. He obtained his PhD from the Institute d'Études Politiques de Paris. So he got his PhD from Paris, yeah, France, and Malaysia, and Master of Economics from University of Malaya, and Bachelor of Science from University of Southern California, Los Angeles. So with you, please, Doctor, please present.
Assalamualaikum, selamat petang. First of all, thank you to the moderator, a long introduction. I'll do my presentation verbally because I'm too lazy to do slides last night. So I'll speak verbally without slides. Apologies to the moderator and my friend, Dr. Ui. The topic given to me, why economic model of sustainability and stability matters post-COVID. What are new models or new model that is needed post-COVID? I'll share my views on this and what are the requirements or prerequisites towards a very sustainable and stable economic model. The model that we have right now has failed or is currently failing. If you look at all spectrum, political stability, there's no political stabilities. There's no economic or financial stabilities. There are no environment stabilities, and there's no, importantly, no social stabilities. If you look at politics last month, one of the model of economic development in the world, one of the rich country, very neutral country, very caring country, Islamic index very high, they moved to the right. Sweden last month, they did an election, they moved to the right. Blame on immigration, for instance. UK is not stable. Italy elected leaders who are also on the right, quite xenophobic, I would say. So there's no stability at the moment. These issues, political, economic, social, and environment, happens before COVID. But COVID make it worse. The political stability, because of the response of COVID, make it worse. Society, there's a division in society, not just globally, but also in Malaysia. During COVID, for instance, many of us become very racist. I'll try to be honest and as frank possible today in order to be useful. We were very racist and very xenophobic. Who do we blame? We blame the refugees, we blame the migrants. We put them in unhealthy conditions. And we did not say anything, we keep our lip sealed. We cannot blame others when we ourselves also doing that. Social breakdown also happened in Malaysia. Economic and financial crisis happened before COVID. COVID make it worse. And if you see globally, poverty number has gone up. I think this year World Economic Forum shows about 60 to 90 million more people fall into poverty. Inequality also went up, including in Malaysia. Poverty went up, additional 1 million people fall into poverty. Inequality also went up. Environment also, we have an issue. Extreme climate change, extreme heat, extreme flooding is happening. And it's not just globally, you've seen, but also in Malaysia. And there's no symbol of greed or the symbol of you want to grow without while neglecting environment is Perak. Perak is a symbol, physical symbol. Why? I'm not saying this because I'm in Perak. When you pass from Penang to go from Kuala Kangsar, let's say to go to Tapah, you pass by all the quarries, by the highway. It's a scar on the face of Ipoh. Such an ugly sight. Why do we need to do that? And it's getting worse and worse. It's a stark reminder, a brutal reminder that we are not taking care. Money, destroying forests, destroying that part, destroying hills is more important, is not important as getting income. So it's the model that we have very unstable, either globally and also in Malaysia, even for social, because of economic and financial crisis. There's a lot of studies shown about people going to the street. This year alone, January to July, 90 countries have experienced one form of riot. In Indonesia, because of fuel costs that went up, the number of riot in Indonesia between January to July is 600 times. The people have gone to riot because increase of fuel costs. So all this happening, the topic is stable or unstable, stable and sustainable. We are not stable, we are not sustainable across all spectrum. Then what will be the model? It should not be the model focused on GDP. The second session, I think Prof. Azlan mentioned, should not be just on income. It should not be even on high income. Malaysia make a mistake, I think. Not I think, I believe. When we aim to be a high-income nation. Brunei richer than Netherlands in terms of high-income index. Saudi richer than Switzerland, Saudi richer than Germany, Saudi richer than, or Kuwait richer than Korea and Japan. You want to be Saudi, you want to be Brunei, or you want to be Switzerland, or you want to be Germany. I think high income nation is very misleading. You want to be developed. And GDP, high income nation should not be the focus. Looking at GDP alone is also wrong. Many of you are students. I strongly suggest you read a paper by Prof and Jomo. And the title of the paper, very interesting. Why eating dead rats, tikus mati, is good for GDP. If you eat dead rats, if I say to a person, I dare you to eat tikus mati, I give you 10,000 ringgit. And if you do that, GDP went up by 10,000 ringgit. But it is pointless. So when everybody say, oh, GDP, GDP, you say, hold on. It's like a car. It tells you how fast you are going, but doesn't tell you you're going to the wrong direction, or passenger belakang dah terkeluar dah. It doesn't tell you what really important. And what is important, I think what Sultan said this morning, all the 3 Ps, people, planet, and prosperity. And if you want to summarize that in a model, United Nations has done on Sustainable Development Goals. SDG 17, which is leave no one behind. We cannot grow if some segment of population is not growing. Are we moving towards that direction, towards sustainability, towards stability, towards leaving no one behind? I am quite pessimistic because of what happened, how we respond during COVID. During COVID, when countries have issues in increasing revenue or maintaining the revenue level, what usually happens? Half of the low and middle income countries, they cut health spending. Another half of total countries in the world cut education spending. Another half would cut social protection spending. So protection against the people or investment in the future has severely reduced. And on top of that, we do not expand our revenue, many countries around the world, rather than reduce the revenue, because many countries cut income taxes, including Malaysia. We also cut our taxes. So the issue of instability or unsustainable economic growth is not global, but it's also us. Our mobility did not grow, poverty increased, inequality also move up. The impact of COVID to Malaysia is quite, I would use this word carefully, it's very, very dangerous and very damaging. The number of Malaysians who fall into poverty is 1 million people. That's a lot of people. That's in terms of people yang jatuh miskin. But in terms of people who loses educational opportunities because cannot go to school or we do not have adequate devices, is much, much higher. And this link to social stability, because the states that most affected are not rich states, not Perak, not Penang, not Selangor. It's Kelantan. Poverty level in Kelantan actually doubled during COVID. Poverty level in Sabah increased from 20 to 25. Poverty level in Terengganu doubled. Sabah economic progress have moved to 2016 level. So poorer state is much affected. Then what must we do? If everything is stable, we did not do well to respond to COVID, globally we did not do well, what must we do? First, we need money. If I want to invest well in education, in health, in social protection, I need money. Globally, if you look at many countries, their revenue has come down. Malaysia also has come down. Our revenue also has come down. In fact, our share of tax to GDP is not far off than Sri Lanka ratio. Sri Lanka become a basket case because they do not have enough money. Our share of tax to revenue to GDP also almost the same. I'll give you a simple example why I say Malaysia has no money. The biggest income for the country we collect from personal income tax and corporate tax. Those two are our biggest revenue collection. These two amount, ngam-ngam, or sufficient only to pay salaries and pension. That's it. No money else to pay for everything. When you add from SST, that's almost ngam-ngam to pay our debt. When you add investment income from Petronas, gedebuk-gedebak, ngam-ngam to pay for subsidies, ngam-ngam to pay for grant to state government and supply services. We do not have reserve. And in fact, we make it worse by cutting our tax. Recent budget, and thank God Parliament is off, so we can put another budget. We should not cut taxes. We did cut taxes. The other countries that cut taxes like us is UK. And they have lost their finance minister and probably the prime minister too. Another country that did this did not personal income tax, he cut corporate tax, and he cut GST level from 14% to 8%, is Sri Lanka. And right away they become basket case. Tax is important. I'm not saying tax the rich, but it should be fair taxation. US and Europe grew the longest, a very sustainable rate after World War II. And guess what the tax rate, top marginal tax rate was during that period? In America, after World War II, if you make $1 million, government would take 92%. The top marginal tax rate in America was 92%. The top marginal tax rate in UK, after I think 10 years after World War II, was 83%. And the country did not collapse. And America was clear. We did not impose this high marginal tax rate to collect revenue. No. We imposed this high tax so that society is meritocratic. You should not define your success because the money, how much money your parents have. So it became a very balanced society. But after Reagan and Thatcher, they cut it a lot. Money is important. Taxation matters. But importantly, what can we do towards equitable, sustainable, and stable society? In particular, in Malaysia, is what the first speaker or the first panel said. We need to have integrity and proper governance. You can have the best economic model. If those who are in charge is corrupt, country will fail. And for lack of better word, we are failing and we are falling. People do not want to talk about 1 MDB. Yeah? Najib will come out from the prison, if not pardoned, 2034. 12 years. 2034. We will finish paying 1 MDB debt in 2037. Even when he come out, they enjoy 5 tahun, we still be paying 1 MDB debt. We pay 15 billion this year, and next year we're going to pay 13 billion. 28 billion. To put things in perspective, how much this money is. Budget for Perak that were passed by the State Assembly this year is 1.1 billion. In other words, if that money is not stolen, we do not have to finance Perak for 28 years. Kelantan budget also about 900 million. So you add Kelantan and Perak, you don't have to finance them for 14 years. That's how much money we have lost. That's on 1 MDB alone. Tabung Haji, you can ask Dr. Nick, he was CEO of Tabung Haji. We bail out 20 billion on Tabung Haji. And you have to remember this, why social stability matters, why everybody has to benefit, why social cohesion matters. When you bail out Tabung Haji, it's not Muslim money. It's the Chinese money who go and bail out, who's the Indian money who go and bail out, it's the Malay money who went bail out because it's a federal money, public money. We did not take from zakat to bail out Tabung Haji. So social cohesion, like Sultan kata, laksa, asam laksa is very important. And to avoid corruption, high moral values matters. Corruption is not new. When China built the Great Wall, one of the greatest wall ever built, and they built it to defend invasion from the north, from the Mongols. And it was quite long wall. If you line up, it's like from here to Baghdad. It's 4,000 miles. Very, very long. The first 100 years, it was breached 3 times. Not because the wall is weak, but the guard moral is weak. They bribed the guard buka pintu, Mongols came in. You can build the greatest wall, you can have the best economic model, but if the character of the leader and the follower is weak, the society would fall. You can say that's 1,000 years ago. Let's take recent one. Before World War II, Argentina is richer than Switzerland. Now Argentina is ranked 50. Switzerland among the richest in the world. No chocolate, no nothing. But they're one of the biggest producers, very successful country. You say that's Europe. You take Philippines, 1960s, second richest country after Singapore. They export doctors to Malaysia. 1960s. Marcos came, basket case until today. You say that's 40 years ago. You take Venezuela, 2000, oil price went up. The richest country in Latin America. Until today is the poorest. Mismanaged and corruption. You say that's Latin America. Let's take Asia. Sri Lanka very near. Middle income countries. Not upper, middle income countries. Within 2 years, become poor. You have to queue up 1 week to get a petrol. You can fail fast. And that depends on the characteristic of our people. There's a lot of young people here. I would ask you to reflect and rethink of why we lack moral character, why we lack moral courage. Having higher education doesn't mean that we have higher moral values. 1MDB is a perfect example. The first CEO of 1MDB graduated from Stanford. The last CEO of 1MDB graduated from LSE. The SRC board member, Subo, graduated from Harvard. It's pointless if you can have good education, but you are corrupt. For you to think why we lack courage and why we lack moral values. And I think you have to go back. Universal values, or for us, many of us here, is Muslim values, Islamic values, not Muslim values. The first speaker showed the ranking of Islamic society that follow Islamic values. The highest rank, top 30, all non-Muslim countries. Malaysia ranked 38, Saudi ranked 93. We rather be Saudi than rather be Korea. Korea practice or Japan practice Islamic values, also although there are no Muslim there. So to have, my time is up, to have a stable and sustainable society or economic model, there are many ingredients: fair taxation, good social protection, many economic models. But all of those are pointless if society is morally bankrupt. If we do not have integrity, we do not have social governance. The rest does not matter. The integrity and governance is the most matter. And to do this, the moderator of the first session asked why we lack courage. I was thinking about that, why we lack courage. I think it happens because we are also a feudal society. I'm not saying feudalism. I'm not saying UK has feudal system. Japan has feudal system. They have monarchy, but they do not have feudal mindset. That's a two different thing. I think that's one reason why he asked why we lack moral courage. I think feudalism play important role. And second, perhaps we are scared. And we should not be scared, especially to the young people. This time is important. I'm not trying to be politics. But your decision in electing good people is very precious, and I strongly suggest you do it well. We cannot be neutral. You must take sides. There's a French philosopher, have a book, it's a comedy, they call it, Inferno. He lays down 9 levels of hell, Dante, 9 levels of hell. You know who sits on the deepest of hell? Those who stay neutral during the period of injustice. And we cannot, not enough to say we're not going to vote for corrupt people, and yet we still vote for corrupt people. Then we become hypocrite. And the Quran says this: the deepest of Jahannam is reserved for the hypocrites. I think it's important to be brave, to have moral courage during this very important period. I'm sorry I do not have answer. I did not give you economic answer because I don't think the solution is economic. The solution is moral. To have a good society, moral plays the most important role. I stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Khalid. That was a good presentation, right? Basically, Doctor, thank you for touching on issues on how, particularly for Malaysia. Can I ask a question? Can? Yeah. You see, after the COVID, we noticed that you mentioned the poverty levels have gone up, inequality have gone up also, right? Something maybe you didn't, did you also mention on the government debt also has gone up, right? Government debt has gone up. Businesses are also basically down, still down. They're just recovering. So at this point, our government can't increase the tax rate. Would you agree? No. Can, at this point. But as you mentioned, like 92% in the US and so on. Perhaps maybe you can answer that first. Why the government can still increase the tax rate when businesses are all down, when the poverty has gone up, the government debt also has gone up now to almost ringgit 1 trillion already. So first, perhaps you can answer that first. Then I've got a few more questions for you actually. Okay, perhaps you answer me. I want to understand that why it is still, you think it's still possible to increase the tax rate? Because the government revenue is necessary currently. If you see many universities, especially public universities, they have not enough funding. Many staff have been laid off, you see. So I can see that these universities are not sustainable in the long run. Please go ahead, yeah.
No, we can increase tax, but don't increase tax for the poor.
I mean business tax.
When you look at taxation in Malaysia, all income is not taxed fairly. Let's say you earn 100,000, because we are worker, let's say lecturer, 100,000, you pay tax, 28% or 24%, whatever. Now, if I earn dividend 100,000,
you don't pay.
I pay zero tax.
Yeah.
If I invest in something, I get capital gain 100,000, I don't pay tax.
Yes,
I pay zero tax. In other countries, there's capital gain tax, there's dividend tax. In OECD countries, rich country club, the rate is 30%. In Ireland, it's 50%.
All right, that means you're talking about new taxes.
That's,
As far as Malaysia is concerned, you're asking for new other taxes, not business tax.
no, we have businesses pay tax, but not tax fairly. I'm saying the people are not, many people who are supposed to pay tax are not paying tax. Why we not taxing them?
Okay.
And instead we tax lower income people. Why do I say we tax lower income people? Beginning January 1st, 2024,
GST.
if any of us bought items online from overseas below 500 ringgit, you are taxed 10%. Who buy online below 500 ringgit from Shopee? Those low income people or middle income people who want good deals. Now you are being taxed on that. Why can't you tax capital gain? Why can't you tax dividend? You can exclude many people. If you invest in unit trust or below 100,000, exempt from tax. Many ways you can do that, but we are not taxed fairly. And taxation is important for social protection and social assistance.
I would certainly agree with you that there are many people who are supposed to be taxed, they are not paying tax. The one I would agree with you. Right? So I think thanks for the other question that I will ask. After that, audience, you can post your question. Because remember I said from this, you will get to speak. Just one more question, let me, if you allow me to ask Dr. Dan, after that I'll open to you, okay? Now, the other question that actually I want is very current to the current situation. It is, if you notice, what happened in the East Asian economic crisis in 1998, when the ringgit was attacked, right? When the ringgit was attacked, basically it is volatility in the exchange rate. Nobel laureate Robert Alexander Mandela once said that a lot of volatility that you see, when I say volatility, then it's related to stability. So a lot of volatility, it arises from the forex market. So when the forex market moves a lot, then it moves many other things in the economy, all right? So now you see in 1998, when the East Asian, the currency speculators attacked the currency, then the Malaysian economy went into whatever you call it, berserk or whatever, And that created, until today, in my opinion, it created an economic crisis that we have not actually recovered from then. And it also brought about a political problem. It started with Tun Mahathir and, with Anwar. And until today, we are still facing that problem. So that problem that started from the currency fluctuation problem is actually the effects until today we have not recovered from it. That's in my opinion when I look at entire this thing. So why I'm posing this is that now currently the ringgit is also going down a lot. Basically, it's not our fault. If you ask me, it comes from exported from the US, right? But I think similar things are going to happen. The moment you move, the exchange rate goes like this, it's going to create a havoc of, movements in many other markets in Malaysia. So what is your opinion about that? So some scholars are feeling that we need a complete economic reset. And the word reset, people also have a different idea. What I believe what is a reset is different from what another person thinks a reset is. So what is your, take on this? I mean, please, thank you.
No, we are in the global economy. We trade more than the size of our economy. So we have no choice but to be involved in the global financial system. Yeah,
of course.
No choice. The state of a nation is dictated mostly by the West. Why do we say that? If US decided I want to increase interest rate, every country in the world become problem. US problem become a global problem. That's number one. And number two, if I want to borrow, any Malaysian company wants to borrow, who would rate me? Usually 3 companies will rate me, all the rating agencies. And usually young guys sitting somewhere in New York or in Singapore. Unless you change this, I think ASEAN tried to do a rating agency to rate ourselves, not that successful. Unless we punch above our weight, then we can have that. But unfortunately, there's no leader in ASEAN. Who's our leader in ASEAN? If America used to say, if I need to call Europe, who do I call? Now, if America wants to call ASEAN, who do I call? Before you have strongmen, you have Suharto, you have Dr. Mahathir, you have Kuan Yew. Now who's the leader in ASEAN? Who punched above our weight? You look at South China Sea, we are not saying anything. The Chinese incursion or American incursion, we did not say anything. So I think strengthening ASEAN is if it's a country, it's the 4th largest economy in the world, bigger than the European Union economic community. I think consolidating ASEAN as a single voice, I think it is important in rearranging this global economic architecture.
Okay, Doctor, thank you very much. Now I'm going to open the session to all of you all, Q&A. So if you have any question, please stand up, introduce yourself, and you can post the questions to both our...
May I jump in?
Yes, please, you can answer.
Concerning taxation, and what was said earlier by Matt and earlier today as well, about governance, about integrity in governance and so on. Now, in my experience, I've lived in a few countries and I've paid taxes all over the place. Now, in Sweden, I was paying 45% of my taxes. Yeah? And by the way, capital gains is 30% there. Zero here, right? And people pay those taxes. And why? There were some, of course, who left the country and so on, but most not. And the reason they were willing to pay taxes was that there was transparency, there was proper democracy, transparency, you know where your money is going. You actually see your money coming back. So taxes it's in a little box and it moves around. So the redistribution of money is open. It can be, you can follow it. Now, we don't have that at all here. And like Prof Saad was saying this morning, there is no freedom of information, all that. All those governance issues, if they're not in place, taxation, I don't know, I pay taxes, what does it give me? There's corruption in the system, and therefore taxes are seen as something, you don't know what they're actually for. So back again to our main point, I think governance has to be corrected. And why the young has to vote for the right government, right?
Yes, yeah. So governance is one of the reasons in Malaysia, in my opinion, related to this, why the inequality is rising is what you're saying. Because we don't tax the capital gains. So the rich is just keeping the wealth growing, and the poorer ones are facing, dwindling income. So that's one of the reasons. So I agree, if it's a capital gain tax, I would totally agree for, these taxes should be introduced. Okay, I have other questions, but I want to give the chance to our participants to ask questions. Because until now, we have not given you the chance to ask questions. So please, anyone?
Okay, me. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Please, yeah.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
I would like to ask this question to Dr. Muhammad Khalid.
Yes.
Okay, what's your opinion and belief to give money to people is an economic model, the best economic model to our country, such as give BRIM, bantuan keluarga Malaysia, and whatsoever terminology and branding about this. And then
you mean welfare, is it? Are you talking about welfare payments?
Yes.
Welfare.
And then how welfare, such as BRIM and BKM can decrease poverty to our country. That's all from me.
Okay, basically it's asking, can welfare be used for reducing poverty? You can answer.
Can we have one more, please? One more here, please.
Okay, I'll collect the questions then. Go ahead. Yeah.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Omar from University Sultan Azlan Shah. I would like to ask a question to Dr. Beng. Basically, our country is losing talents. We are losing talent to Singapore, Australia, and the best example is Dr. Nur Amanah Cik Bakri. So, I think, basically, if we are losing talents like this, our country future is very dark. So, I want to ask you, Dr. Beng, what are the best policies to keep our talent remain in this country, or perhaps we can attract more talents overseas? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, brother. So I think we'll ask Dr. Khalid, you can answer first, then after that, Doctor, yeah, please.
The question asks about welfare, giving cash. We do give cash, but we give cash to the wrong people. We give more to those who don't need it. Why do I say that? Our subsidy bill is 80 billion plus social assistance. Petrol bill alone, petrol subsidy is 50 billion. Who benefit? Not people in this room, or probably people in this room. If you earn more than 10,000 ringgit a month, your subsidy, petrol subsidy, is about 1,000 ringgit a month. Simple, if you drive a BMW, every week you put full tank, minimum, let's say 100 ringgit, not even 5, 7 series, you take 3 series, 100 ringgit per month, your subsidy is 100 ringgit. You put 4 times a month, that's 400 ringgit. You times 12, it's 5,000 ringgit. Maximum BRIM you get, the poor people got 2,500 ringgit. If you earn more than 10,000 ringgit a month, your petrol subsidy that you benefit is 1,000 ringgit a month. If you earn less than 1,000 ringgit a month, the petrol subsidy that you collect from the government is 15 ringgit. We have a welfare, but we give to different people. People who don't need it. We should have a proper social protection system, and it should follow a life cycle approach. You want to protect the child, so you give cash assistance for the child. When they're in labor force, unemployment insurance. When they retire, old age pension, which should be universal. There's few models you can do that. Then it is better towards sustainability, towards equality, and you reduce poverty. Currently, we are welfare, but we give to the wrong people, and it's a waste.
Thank you, Doctor. Maybe I can add a little bit. Maybe I also question to you, Doctor. You know, in the Islamic system, if you see the Islamic system, we have this Waqaf system, right? You know, Waqaf is kind of Islamic endowment, Doctor, for your info. When there's a Waqaf system, the Waqaf system becomes something like a social security for almost everybody. It guarantees social security for everyone. And if you look into the Islamic history, you find that just the zakat rate of 2.5% is basically enough to cover for the poor and all this thing. And a lot of other public expenditures are covered through the Waqaf system. You know, like if you go to Istanbul, Turkey, even if you find Waqaf an endowment for animal feed for stray cats and stray dogs. So you see this every day, there's feed for stray cats, stray dogs. So imagine a Waqaf system that takes care from people until even the stray cats and stray dogs. And in that system you find the tax rate is very, very low. And the system takes care of everybody. So do you think that, a Waqaf system, if we make a national Waqaf system properly administered, probably we can go to the kind of thing where you can reduce all these tax rates to a minimum. When rich people, when they make a lot of money, what do? You can't do much, you see. When you have a lot of wealth, you'll tend to, at the end, you'll give back to the society in the form of something. So this is how the Islamic system works. People give, they'll give build a road, highway. They might name it after their grandparent or mother or whatever, right? But then there'll be no toll to pay for the people. And they will take care of the entire the road system. So something like that, is it possible, do you think that we could develop the Waqaf and endowment systems to, compensate for, so that you don't have to tax all the time people? What do you think, Doctor?
I think there's two parts to the answer. One is how do we see the role of the state? You can have Waqaf or less commitment from the government. You privatize school, you privatize hospital, you privatize higher education. So the role of the state, financing of the state become much less. Is it enough using Waqaf money to then compensate? Probably a challenge. And Waqaf I think is a good model. Many educational and health institutions use this. In fact, one of the best countries or institutions that practice this and become the biggest endowment fund is Harvard University, purely on endowment basis, except they don't call it Waqaf, they call it endowment. But all this, if you tax 2.5% or you tax 7% on this asset or on capital, whatever, all boil down to how the money is spent. Yeah. You can collect, but if those trustees are corrupt, waste, nobody will pay.
Yeah, that's another issue.
It's not about tax level. My friend Dr. E mentioned in Sweden, 45%. Average in Nordic countries, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, average tax rate is 54%. The percentage of people who avoid tax is the lowest in the world. Why? If I make 1 million, 500,000 goes to the government. Why? I go out from my house, I want to take a train works on time. If my kid wants to go to school of high quality. My wife gives birth, the state takes care, my money. Go to higher education, high quality, low fees. I see where my money is. If you put high tax, but politicians put in their pocket, kawin tiga, why should I pay tax? I think the integrity and usage of taxpayers' money is very important. Otherwise, nothing will work.
Agree. Thanks, Doctor, for your. So now, one more. We need to answer the question. Dato, how Malaysia can keep its talents home, please?
It's a really very, very complicated issue. No easy answer to that. I think a lot of countries have to deal with that problem at the federal level, and even at state level in Penang, we have that problem. So even for Penang, let's say, even if it's a Malaysian leaves Penang and goes to goes to Klang Valley, it's a problem for Penang. You know, so it's a problem that is intranational, international, and so on and so forth. So I tend to think, to simplify an answer to that question, I would think that one should not think of trying to stop people from moving. It's about how do you attract people, and what are the things that attract people, and you ask yourself, why are your people going there and why they're not staying? Then if you have something similar, they wouldn't leave, right? So and at the same time, you don't want your young people to not leave, right? If they're interested in the world, if they want to go on and study and so forth, you should not put mechanisms in place to stop them doing that. Then you'll have communism or whatever. People go. The question then is, why don't they come back, right? It's more that. Now, I can say that I know of many cases where Malaysians do come back. Sometimes it's because in the end, they miss Malaysia, or they couldn't stand the different culture, whatever. But I suppose that's a minority in a way. Many go and then they do stay overseas for various reasons. You know, you live your life there. After a while, you get kids, and your kids go to school there, and then suddenly you say, I'm here for the kids, and then you sacrifice and so on. So all those things happen, and you can't really stop all that. Our question, I think, should be, how do we attract people? It doesn't have to be Malaysians you attract back. You can attract other people. But if you also have policies that don't want other people to come, you only want your own people, you have a problem. We are famous for, you know, we can have an expat coming in, the wife cannot work. And the wife might be extremely educated, but she can't work because, so we are shooting ourselves in the foot in many ways because we are too nationalistic. Economics, as I was saying, it's not really necessarily nationalistic. It's regionally connected. So we have to play that game. It's a much more complicated game. And if you're playing in an introverted fashion, you're going to lose out because other countries are moving faster. Let's say Singapore, where I used to live a while, they have active policies to attract people. Right? They attract a lot of Malaysians, and they put into place all sorts of mechanisms, fair or not fair, you know. But that's what they want, and they've decided, and so they're getting them. So we have to learn from others as well, and to, at the same time, don't overdo it. We want our people to go out, be exposed, to learn things. The question is, why don't they come back?
Thank you, Doctor. I remember even in Singapore, they have a durian party to attract people. So that's another question. Yeah, please go ahead.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Azizi bin Ahmad from University Sultan Azlan Shah. Okay, my question is, according to IMF white paper, it suggested that the government in politically fragmented country with high degree of political instability need to address its root cause and try to mitigate its effects on the design and implementation of economic policy. Only then countries could have durable economic policies that may engender higher economic growth. So above all, we are talking about good governance, we are talking about integrity and so on. But I think, do you agree that above all, political stability is very important in order to make sure that our economics grow and based on this economic model? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Azizi. Dr. Wee, would you like to talk about political stability?
About political stability, yeah, we have to ask why we don't have it, why we once had it, and why. Well, it depends on the time span you look at it. If we say that in the Mahathir years it was stable, but then 1997 everything collapsed. So you know, it's a question of when is it stable, when is it not. Again, I would suggest that if we think of the national economy, the Malaysian national economy and the Malaysian governance, it is also connected to external forces always. It's also about adaptability. You know, so your people have to be always better educated than their neighbors in a way, right? I tend to think that Malaysia doesn't do politics very well. It does politicking very well. That's one of the reasons why I tried to use the word democratism instead of democracy, because democracy can be played with. It can be bent any which way you like, and no laws have been broken. You know, and it's so that from the outside, an investor looking on is going to see, wow, this country fools around with its politics. Its rules can be bent so easily and so on and so forth. So the spirit of democracy has not grown. And that's what I think Malaysia needs. It's a sense of fairness. It's not something grand. That you care for each other, you respect each other. You don't try to, whenever you can pull the rug from your neighbor, you pull the rug from under the neighbor. Then they'll do the same thing.
Correct, yeah.
And that leads to this instability, and the rules can be bent. The dice are always loaded. Things like that. So I don't know. Back to perhaps the civil service and things like that. I tend to think my more direct experience in the last 5 years dealing with the state government in Penang. I think along the way somewhere, and Mark will know better how that took place, we sort of privatized and so on. And one would expect when you privatize, the civil service becomes more efficient and smaller and so on and so on. But no, the civil service grew instead. I think in the long run what we're seeing is that we have lost a technocratic sense in governance. Governance needs technocrats. And I think I see that in Singapore a lot. They're very technocratic, overly so, to the extent that even their politicians are technocrats. So their politicians can't campaign. They talk like technocrats.
People with talents.
Well, talents, or that they're technocrats, And I think our bureaucracy is too bureaucratic. It's not technocratic. If you know what I'm saying with the difference. You need experts within the system. Even a simple thing like, let's say you want to call for tender, you actually need in-house experience, in-house technocrats to come up with that call for tender, right? Now, you don't have that, so what do? In the end, you call for, what do you call them? You ask for project proposals instead, meaning that the expertise is outside. And then somebody, somewhere, is going to hand you that project, and then you agree on it. It opens the door for corruption. And so that's just one example of how we have bureaucratized too much, and we have lost on the technocratic side. And that's part of the problem, I think.
Thank you, Doctor. Actually, we have 1 more minute, so I'll just wrap it up. Unless there's one more question, because we have one more you'd like to ask. Okay, please, a quick one. Is that a question? Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Assalamualaikum. Yeah, I have a question, please.
Please, yeah.
Please, okay.
This is the last question because we are already...
we are in the World Conference on Islamic Thought and Civilization. So my question is, do we have a religious economic model that have been given due study or been applied to face all the problems that we are facing now to ensure the economic models of stability and sustainability? So the key point is religious economic models. Thank you. Hope to hear from Dr. Ui Kibeng from Executive Director Penang Institute. And also looking from our Honorable Dr. Muhammed.
Okay, Doctor, you can give a quick answer because I think it's already 4 o'clock.
Okay. Well, 2 points I could make. One is that you mentioned Islamic thought and civilization. As a non-Muslim, while listening to the talk this morning and to you as well, Mark, you talk about Islamic values and that there are non-Muslim countries that are doing much better. I find that approach rather refreshing in that you're not staring at the words, you're staring at the effects of how things, what is done and how the effects are. And so the effects in a country that might not be using Muslim discourses actually achieves results that a Muslim country would want. Now that approach I think is a refreshing one. Now economics as a model, that's a difficult one, right? I mean the whole of the late 20th century was about 2 different economic models trying to kill each other, right? That's what we call the Cold War. So economics in many ways is a rather new thing. It's a new subject. Matt can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Now I studied Chinese philosophy.
Maybe I can just add,
for example, and you can see that the Confucians and whoever, the Maoists or whoever, they thought up all sorts of things about how society should work. what they did not have was an economic model. So that was quite common in the old days, before Adam Smith and people came along, that you had models, and I would perhaps put religion in that context. There was never an economic model. And that, because we didn't think like that, I think. And it's in modern times where I realized that economic can be made into a science, and governance is largely about economics, because it's the handling of assets. So it's a work in progress, how you get a model that can work. And I think it's very dependent on the country itself, and where the country is, and so on and so forth. There is no one size fit all, I don't think.
Okay, Doctor, so thank you very much. Basically, if I can just add, we don't even have to call it a religious economic model. You can go for common values. For example, everyone will agree ethical economic models. That is Islamically also okay, other religions also okay, right? Or you can use terms, because human values are, especially in economics, it's a very common. Nobody likes things to be, to be cheated, or everybody likes affordable homes. Everyone loves, price stability and so forth. You see, so we can go for common values, And if it is Islamic, it is Islamic, all right? So anyway, thank you, for this thing. We have come to an end. Basically, you can see that, the models of stability and sustainability, there are a lot of issues, huge issues. From what I've seen from my, from Malaysia, we have financial stability is a problem. Exchange rate stability is currently a problem. Yeah, price stability is need to be also looked at. Political stability is there. Environmental stability, sustainability is also there, right? Because of the environmental, we have a lot of floods and things like that. So there's a lot of issues. We cannot just simply rely on the government to come and solve these problems for us. So all of us are, individuals, governments, everyone, businesses, we all got to play our small role in order to assist in solving these issues, okay? So with that, let's give a big applause to our speakers, yeah? And thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. Yeah.
We thank our distinguished panelists and our honorable moderator for such an enlightening and pleasant session. To the audience, thank you again for your participation. We hope everyone benefited from the session.
نشكر جميع أعضاء الجلسة على تقديم هام وممتاز، ونطلب منكم أن تبقوا على الجلوس.
Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we will now continue to our last and final session for today on geopolitics and global security.
متعجلين ننتقل إلى جلسة أخيرة لليوم وللمؤتمر عامة، وهي في الجغرافية السياسية والأمن العالمي.
For this session, the conference invites the moderator, Honorable Professor Dr. Siva Murugan Pandian, together with distinguished panelists, Madam Virginie Binoto and Mr. Timo Guzman, to take their seats on the stage. The floor is yours, Prof.
Thank you, MC, and also a very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, panelists. First, allow me to express my gratitude to the organizer, Tan Sri Nordin Kadi, Ustaz, who have extended an invitation to us, all of us, as a moderator and also as a panelist, to be part of the
finale for today's evening's event, the last session, the third session, which is titled as Geopolitics and Global Security. We have two prominent speakers with us who will share their thoughts, ideas on the topic. Let me introduce both speakers. First is Mrs. Virginie Dato on my left, who's the French diplomat who started a career at the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs as a multicultural cooperation desk officer in year 2000. She was posted as regional cooperation attaché at the French embassy in Greece in 2003. She then headed back to head office in 2008, where she took over as desk officer for international economics, World Bank, and IMF. And she then held the position of ambassador's chief of staff in Spain, followed by counselor for global affairs at the Embassy of France in Mexico. On August 1st, 2022, she was appointed as deputy head of mission at the French embassy in Malaysia and has assumed the position of charge d'affaires since September 1st. Our second speaker is Mr. Timo Guzman on my right. Mr. Timo has joined the team of the EU delegation to Malaysia in September 2021. He has previously served as a diplomat for the Federal Foreign Office of Germany between 2009 and 2021. He has previously been posted to Quito and Jakarta. In Berlin, Mr. Guzman has worked on cultural diplomacy and the Venezuela desk. Before joining the German Federal Foreign Office, he worked as business consultant, university lecturer, and in a think tank. He studied EU integration studies in Osnabrück, Germany, and Latin American studies in Salamanca, Spain. Mr. Guzman's mother tongue is German, and he speaks English, Spanish, French, and a bit of Bahasa Indonesia. So you're welcome to ask questions in Bahasa Indonesia as well. I was told he engaged with a friend in Kelantan for almost 1.5 hours in Bahasa Indonesia. Okay, a bit of housekeeping. Presenters will be given about 20-25 minutes to present their thoughts, ideas, and followed by Q&A questions. I think the participants can share their name, the institution, make it short so that we can have more questions. I should congratulate the organizer because the participants are still here at 4 o'clock in the evening. Thank you to be with us. Thank you so much. Before I pass to the first speaker, I just want to share what Simon Dalvin in his book, Rethinking Geopolitics, said. He said, geopolitics is a complex cultural matter where identities are formulated, represented, and repressed in contemporary political discourses. And also, we have seen how geopolitics have played a role throughout 3 years ago, especially in pandemic. When we faced COVID-19 pandemic, we saw how it had changed and how it has somehow infused or incorporated into global security as well. And how it has also balanced the powers, not only among the superpowers, but also regionally, has created an imagined community in the surface, in the net. And we are seeing that as well. So I also would like to quote what David Fidler said in his book, Geopolitics, Global Health, and the Group of Seven, who described geopolitics has had a significant impact on responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. How this impact signaled the balance of power and ideological competition, a return to world affairs, while the Group of Seven, the superpowers, actively engaged in global health. So, I would like to invite the first speaker to share her thoughts. How can we move forward, looking at the geopolitics, global security, and also if we can relate to what the Majesty said earlier in his royal address, 3Ps. He emphasized on planet, prosperity, and also on people. In fact, he connected that with trust and inclusivity. The chair is yours. Please welcome
Thank you very much.
Mrs. Virginie.
Thank you very much and good afternoon to all of you. And thank you very much for the organizers. Thank you, moderator, and happy to be with my friend Timo, with whom I obviously work. Thank you very much for inviting me, and my apologies. I will have a definitely French approach to this topic as a French diplomat. As you mentioned earlier, geopolitics is a complex study. It's a complex field of expertise. It has very different perspectives depending on where we talk. And I think the most important thing is we need to agree on the terms of what we're trying to do collectively. And as you were mentioning, His Royal Highness talked about people, talked about the planet, talked about prosperity. But the actual situation we are in emphasizes the fact that sometimes we're not talking about the same things. We use the same words. We pretend to be reflecting the same values. We want to have an impact on people because everything we say, wherever we say it, will have an impact everywhere else, thanks to the social media or on behalf of because of the social media. And this is important because we're at a moment in time where we do not all agree on the same terms. So I will go back to geopolitics seen from where I come from and the embassy and state I represent here today. Of course, geopolitics, when you're starting from France, is about history and geography, and our geography. And I will finish by this, though it will lead to the floor then to Timo. France cannot be complete without Europe, but I will leave it for the end. France is also a country, as you may know, that has people all around the world, and we are present on the 5 continents, and that is why we are talking about multilateralism. We're talking about being on board on every topic and wanting to play a role on the whole planet. We have people in the Caribbean, we have people in the north of Africa, we have Guyana in the South America, we have islands in the Indian Ocean, and of course territories in the Pacific. We have 1.6 million people living abroad. And that has an impact on the way we project and the way we reflect about geopolitics and the balance that we're seeking between north and south, east and west. Sometimes, especially in Europe, they say that we're the south of Europe, but we're the north of the south. So we're right in the middle, and it has an impact on the way we behave and the way we think of ourselves. We also have, being a country of immigration, a very diverse population. We have different cultures and religions, different countries of origins, different geographies and interests, and numerous diasporas in France, be it from close countries like Portugal, or for further countries that we reached during the colonial period. But today we say that 1 out of 4 persons in France has at least one grandparent coming from another country. And for example, my grandmother came from Italy when she was 7 years old. This means that we've always been thinking about working with the other countries. We had no choice, and then we decided that we would be working. We would be working on the European Union and on dealing with a specific political or geopolitical object that would be so important for us. But I would like to come back to the geopolitics we're facing today. We tended to think that geopolitics could be without conflict. We had so many other challenges ahead. We're thinking about geopolitics in terms of climate change, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of the SDGs, education, health, and just with these topics we had a lot of job to do. And then we were hit on the European continent by the coming back of a traditional war. But this is not just a traditional war. It has been prepared with a rational, it's hybrid warfare. It is about manipulation of migration, which is also a tool of geopolitics. It is about a war of narratives and an interpretation of the Charter of the Union, of the EU. It is, in the end, an aggression and an attack on the UN Charter. But again, it is interesting, the geopolitical object, because the last speech of the President Putin was interesting in the way he was turning down all the words we've been working on, and this is destabilizing because many countries, as was said before, you don't know where you are anymore if we can't use the same words. I remember President Obama saying it about the American people being very divided and saying if in America we can't agree that this is a chair or this is a true vote, then how can we act as a country? Well, it's the same thing for us. Basically, the importance for France, the important thing is to be a balanced power. It doesn't mean not having values, and it doesn't mean not defending it. We have allies, but not because we are allied means that we're going to follow on their old policies. And then we have other countries that will be, we can be, as I think when there's the politics of Malaysia on hedging, you can be trying to focus on different partners at different times. We will always be working with China because it is an important partner, even if it's in other terms, it can be a rival power or everything. And we are still talking to Russia, even if we need to agree on what we're trying to do within this dialogue. So the role that we see for France is avoiding escalation, preserving dialogue while being firm on the principles. We're quite preoccupied with the fueling of instability in many regions, and we're really aiming at having the more, and that's why this conference is interesting. Dialogue on values, dialogue on democracy, dialogue on geopolitics, and what are we trying to do together. In the Indo-Pacific, as I mentioned, we're the only EU members with the territories in the Indo-Pacific. We've got millions of French citizens living there, 3/4 of the French exclusive economic zone. We base our politics in this region on security and defense because we are really willing to ensure freedom of navigation and overflight. That is, geopolitics is also about freedom of circulation. Economic pillar on upgrading connectivity and physical and digital infrastructures, which are sectors in which the Indo-Pacific region has needs. Promoting effective multilateralism, as was mentioned earlier and by many people this morning, based on the rule of law, and commitment to common good pillars, promoting ambition and environmental diplomacy, mobilizing partners, concrete initiatives for energy transition, etc. We are trying to play a role as geopolitics power, and I'm sometimes reminded that we are one of the P5 countries, and that includes a huge responsibility. We've been working, and I know we still have work to do on the reform of the Security Council of the United Nations. It has been mentioned earlier this morning, and it is absolutely vital that we reform the Security Council so it can give an impetus back to the UN, and not only to have to go back to the Assembly, even though, of course, the Assembly General is the main body for the discussions. I will just say another word on the importance of, in geopolitics, what we call soft skills or soft diplomacy. We've always been very keen, and it was funny to see the map this morning about the last map. We tried hard to figure out what it was all about, and it was about winning the World Cup, I think. So we've been working with sport diplomacy, and we will be hosting the Olympics. Gastronomy, which was mentioned by His Royal Highness as well this morning, and which is a very important geopolitical tool that we share with Malaysia, the importance of the gastronomy. Digital technologies as well. It's a topic of geopolitics and of security, global security. We definitely need to create international public policies because the digital technology was built by private companies. There were no rules, and we have to fight today dark internet, propaganda. Just to give you a number, the increase in cyber attacks in France between 2020 and 2021 was plus 37%. Actually, the ministry, like Ministry of Foreign Affairs, are very much a target for attacks. And we were talking about energy sovereignty, but I won't go into it too much. So just to give up the floor so we can have time for questions. Of course, the importance for France of the European Union, seen as a part of ourselves. This is our second citizenship. It is in our passports, and we're much more than a geographical region. We are we are even more than a family, I think. And because of this, it was a very important moment for France when it had this rotating presidency of the EU Council, and we've been working so much with the EU delegation. France has its own assets, as I was saying earlier, but we can do nothing alone, and our core partners are our neighbors, and because we're sharing the same values and the same ideals. We have been trying to enlarge the EU, but also reflect on the European continent level, and this especially because of war. But I will, maybe this will be for questions later on, and I will let Timo speak about EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Virginie, for the insights on the topic today, geopolitics and global security. If I can take a bit of the G's, certainly Mrs. Virginie have described. There are different terms used, but yet we are looking for the common understanding. We are looking at the multidimensional approach to address the narrative put upon geopolitics. We are also looking at the soft diplomacy. We are looking at the negotiation. We are looking at dialogues, realism approach, and the impact of social media. It could be positive, could be negative, how it creates a new platform on propaganda, and also what we are seeing today definitely have changed for the past years. That is a bit of what been discussed. We'll go to the second panel before we take the question and answers. So over to you, Mr. Timo, on the same topic, geopolitics and global security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and very good afternoon to each and every one of you. Real pleasure to be in Ipoh once again, and great opportunity to discuss these fascinating issues. And it's a big task to talk about geopolitics. It's a huge area, and therefore, while Virginie was talking, I kind of got the idea to reduce my intervention about one single word. I'm only going to speak about one single word, and this word is not geopolitics, but it is cooperation. Because I believe we are living in a very dangerous world, in tumultuous times. And we live in a perfect storm of a number of parallel crises. But if we look at these different crises, it becomes quite evident that no country can solve this crisis by itself. There was a Belgian foreign minister a while ago who famously said, there are only two kinds of countries in the world. There are small countries, and there are countries that have not yet understood that there are small countries. And in this sense, if we look at the perfect storm that we are facing right now, with issues of food insecurity, with issues of inflation, with cybercrime, with countries weaponizing connectivity, countries instrumentalizing the linkages that were designed to link our countries and bring us closer together, but which are increasingly weaponized. If you look at ongoing war in Europe that Virginie has been talking about before, if we look at the economic upheaval, at the disbalances, at the instability, at return of poverty, two continuously years in which we have lost ground with regard to the SDGs, when we have fallen back on the Human Development Index. If we look at all these different issues that we have to face, and above all, the two monumental historical challenges of facing climate change and facing the repercussions of the digital revolution. All of these issues that I have mentioned now have in common that they can only be resolved by means of cooperation. And yet, I think the Sultan has mentioned this morning, talking about the refugee crisis, that humanity is failing. And unfortunately, we have to be honest, and we have to look in the mirror, and we have to say, and many of the other challenges that I have been mentioning right now, we are also failing. So why is it that we all know that we need to cooperate? We all know that we need to share our humanity. This is why I'm so grateful to be invited to this conference, because to discuss from different angles with distinguished panelists, with distinguished scholars who are here, these kind of challenges is a very first important step, because we can only address challenges that we understand. And to understand better, we have to transcend boundaries. We have to learn to see the world with the eyes of our interlocutor. Virginie has mentioned cultural diplomacy. This is a very important element. There was an Indian poet who unfortunately passed away last year, who said that in terms of cultural co-production, there's a thing called the 6I principle, which I think is very crucial for us as diplomats. I see the world with my 2 eyes. Virginie sees the world with her 2 eyes. But if we have a discussion about the challenges linking us, we can create a vision that transcends 4 eyes, but we can get to 6 eyes. And this is what we have to do as diplomats, listening to Malaysians in this country, listening to your point of views during a day like today, when we have the luxury and the treasure of so many distinguished scholars in one room sharing about these challenges. And so coming back to cooperation, we all understand that cooperation is needed. But at the same time, we see that the arena for cooperation, talking about United Nations, talking about multilateralism, where we are cooperating to try to establish a rules-based international order, a functioning multilateralism that delivers for the needs of our people, one of the 3 Ps. This is increasingly difficult, and We have phenomena of polarization, of increasing difficulties to agree on terms of what we're talking about. Just citing one example, if you look at the joint statement of China and Russia of 4th of February this year, you have extensive pages about democracy, about what China and Russia define as democracy. But I'm sure that probably in a multilateral setting, not everyone would agree to the kind of democracy that has been addressed in this kind of document. And so we indeed have such a degree of polarization and fragmentation of the international system that the very terms of our cooperation have become unclear. And at the same time, we face the problem of collective action. We face difficult choices. This will be one of the big issues in what's coming up over the coming weeks. In the coming weeks, we will once again shift our attention to COP15, COP19, COP27. The climate negotiators will take the floor. It is very clear to I would say 95% of people that climate change is a scientific fact, and it is also quite clear that the generation of policymakers, I would say in our generation of policymakers, is unfortunately probably the last generation of policymakers that can have a meaningful influence to limit the effects of climate change. Because if climate change just goes on and on and on, there will be mutually reinforcing repercussions, and it becomes irreversible at a certain stage. And we know that, our scientists know that. So there's a lot of pressure, and at the same time, there's a lot of skepticism with regard to COP26, the results achieved in Glasgow last year, and also with what we can expect from the upcoming COP27, which will take place in a few weeks. So the issue of collective action, the questions who should pay for it, the question who should actually bear the burden, which generation should bear this burden, which country should bear the burden. It seems so much easier to shift the responsibility either to the coming generation or simply to the neighbors. So unfortunately, cooperation is very easily set and very easily asked for, but very difficult to deliver. So I have to disappoint our moderator, Prof. Siva. I have more questions than answers. I have more uncertainties with regard to the way forward on how to achieve this kind of cooperation. What I can say is that the European Union has a clearly advocated, a clearly stated approach of cooperation in this part of the world. I would like to mention 3-4 examples before I give the floor back to our moderator. Pretty much almost exactly 1 year ago, the European Union has announced the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Cooperation is not just a buzzword, it's not just a formality. Cooperation is a statement that we believe in an inclusive approach to the Indo-Pacific. It is a reflection of our trifold approach towards dealing with China. And the European Union has clearly put that on the table in 2019, stating that we need cooperation with China on issues where we need it, such as climate change, but much beyond, many more than that, of competition in, for example, economic areas, but also of systemic rivalry in other areas. And we see this increasingly, and all of these dimensions are important dimensions in our relationship to China. But in our approach towards the Indo-Pacific, it has been stated, I think by the former ambassador of Japan, that the Indo-Pacific is the scenario, the location in which the biggest conflicts of the future might take place. So it's also the center of gravity of economic growth, of opportunities, of investments. And therefore, the European Union has clearly made this statement with regard to our strategic approach of cooperation with this important part of the world, and is now implementing this. The last example of it is one of these many tiny success stories, these success stories of successful cooperation that often go unnoticed. Therefore, I would like to mention it at this point. Yesterday, the European Union and ASEAN have signed a historic agreement, the world's first region-to-region civil aviation transit agreement in Bali at the ASEAN Transport Ministerial meeting. So for the first time ever, two regional blocs have formalized their cooperation in a strategic sector of common interest, in this case aviation, and have concluded a very meaningful agreement that will now be ratified by all the signing parties, but is valid as of today. It's already being implemented starting today. So this is one of the many success stories that go unnoticed. Another example of the EU's renewed commitment to this region is the Global Gateway, a new set of instruments, total value of 300 billion euros of strategic cooperation in core areas such as infrastructure, but also people-to-people connectivity, education, and always also with regard to the post-COVID response of the European Union, coming back to the issues of digital revolution and green transition. Because, and this is the last thing that I will mention in the interest of time, one of the issues where cooperation was also badly needed, did not kick in immediately, but kicked in eventually, has been the COVID-19 pandemic. I acknowledge that when the crisis set out, many governments in the world, including in Europe, had these massive insecurities, uncertainties, a pandemic, something never dealt with, a traumatizing situation, especially in southern Europe in our case, in countries like Italy and Spain, but also in many other parts of the world. And there was an initial reflex to go back to national solutions. But this has only been an initial reaction, and the European Union has been relatively quick to develop a vaccine and has shared these vaccines with the rest of the world from day one. From day one, when vaccines were being produced in the European Union, for every vaccine that was used within the European Union, another vaccine has been exported. No other part of the world has done that. And it is one of the many success stories that are not being told, that the European Union, as of now, has, for example, delivered more than 56 million doses of COVID vaccinations only to Malaysia. And so this is also an example of cooperation. Of course, with a delay, of course, with uncertainties and national reflexes in the beginning of the pandemic, but eventually, after the vaccination campaign, got going. This has been an area in which we have massively cooperated. And therefore, we live in a highly uncertain world. We are facing massive challenges, there's no doubt about it. The European Union does not have a national day like France with the famous 14 juillet, but we have Europe Day. This is the 9th of May. So usually we would celebrate every year on the 9th of May. This year, in the middle of an existential crisis of a war of aggression in Europe, it was not time for celebration. We organized a panel discussion, a little bit like this one, much smaller in scale, with the University of Malaya, with distinguished Malaysian interlocutors such as Tan Sri Alba, previous foreign minister. And we have discussed the issue of regional cooperation under stress, the examples of European Union and ASEAN, with, of course, the Russian aggression in Europe as the major reason for our crisis, and the situation in Myanmar as the major reason for problems that ASEAN is facing at this moment. So, as has been said in the previous panel, regional cooperation must be part of the solution. It can be the most efficient way of dealing with these uncertainties and of establishing institutions as functioning beacons of cooperation. But the way to get there is sometimes difficult and can require a lot of strategic patience. So, with this, I conclude, Prof. Siva, more questions than answers to your question, but happy to discuss all of this more in detail.
Thank you, Mr. Timo, for the in-depth discussion on the topic. I would say that I think we can agree cooperation needs to be strengthened. Definitely, there are differences in the approach, yet there are uncertainties. The biggest challenge would be how do we overcome the uncertainties? Whether we need to revisit, relook at the issues related at global security. If we address that as a human security, maybe we might move to have a set of new understanding, approach, more comprehensive, holistic, regardless whether it's from this region or that region, but looking at the gap in the uncertainties left by the countries in all regions. Yet, looking back at pandemic COVID-19, we managed well. That could be one of the most successful story that we, as the world century, the world community, world society, have put aside the differences and looked at the common thing that we have to solve. Then we had 3 values that we put forward: respect, understanding, acceptance. Although we may have differences, religion, ethnicity, politically we may have different framework, yet we came together during that period. So I don't think we need another pandemic to be seen as we are in the same line to find a solution. Okay, I'll leave it to the floor. If anyone have questions, please let us know your name, your institution, and make it short so that we can have more questions from all of you. Thank you. Can we have the first one? Please do, sir. Mike.
Hello. I look back to see if there are questions from the back. So I'm the chairman of USAS, and this is my vice chancellor. But before coming to this university as just the chairman, I was in the private sector. And it's very nostalgic for me tonight, or this evening rather, because Germany and France we did a lot of business together. Klockner, Voith, Heidelberg, Koenig&Bauer, Craig Anstalt. I buy your press machines and your paper machines, and France, you did for me a huge central station, Bouygues SA. Have you heard of Bouygues SA? They own Canal Plus and all that. So, but I want to ask my question directly by one story. In 1991, when the ambassador of the US came to visit my office, it was a media company, so they talked to my editors, and they were telling me how we don't understand American culture. And I said I was raised on American culture, like Little House on the Prairie and all those cartoons inside. And at 12 o'clock, it was John Wolfe. I think he became eventually the Deputy Defense Secretary, right? He was ambassador here some way back in 1992. And I told him, sorry, I had to leave you here. Please talk to my editors and journalists. I've got a very important client upstairs in the penthouse. And guess what? It was the chairman of SO. So what he did was, he said, the new ambassador came and said, he called all the American companies and said, what can we do for you? And the American company said, please don't do anything. Because SO has been here for 100 years at that time. So in other words, it was a Malaysian pride, frankly, to be, say, I work with IBM, I work with Shell, I work with SO. We were so commingled in terms of business and so on. I buy a lot of newsprint from Canada, for example, every year about 200 million, half of this country's consumption. But so my question is, why is there such a big difference between the business community that have been interacting with ASEAN for so long, when there is a little understanding among the politicians level of what our region is all about? So maybe being with the embassy, then you can probably see the gap. And that's something that I fail to understand. Thank you. If you can elaborate.
Thank you, sir, for the question. Differences between the business community and also the politicians, I guess. So, any one of you would want to answer first?
As I've just arrived in Malaysia, I will start and you can correct me. If I get your point, of course, there's a big difference between the long-term relationship we've had with enterprises and companies here in ASEAN. I would also mention universities and other cooperation that we've had in very different areas, and the political level, the fact that it's more difficult to have bilateral visits or ministers coming by to the region. I'm a bit new to give you an actual insight on the last French visits in Malaysia, but I know that it's a topic we're working on a lot, because first, for example, to go to France, there's no direct flight. This translates something. It says something about the exchanges that we have. And we've had this direct flight a few years ago for a few years. And in a way or another, it stopped. It would be, of course, for the French government, and I'm sure for the EU as a whole, we're always ready and happy if we can help have more interconnection. And you've mentioned this very important agreement that has just been signed between the ASEAN and the EU. For France and for the French embassy, we would more than welcome a direct flight from here to Paris. But the reality is, in this respect, we need the companies to build this this liaison, flight, and we need to know if there are enough companies having flights or needing to have people come and go, and it's a bit the same thing for bilateral visits. we're always trying to invite our ministers to come, and their interest for Malaysia is real, but then you need to translate it into concrete actions. Okay, the minister can come if there is something to make visible. And we were talking about geopolitics. It's not only about talking, because sometimes the words you use, the words we use can be misinterpreted or can even be transformed. We need to build concrete actions. That's why we've been doing things during, especially on climate change and very concrete cooperation actions. We are doing many things with the students and with the universities, and we need to do more. And we're really willing to engage with the Malaysian authorities to find new ways of cooperating and having concrete actions. Maybe you can...
Not much to add, but I could be very provocative at this point, and I very much like your questions, and there are different ways to answer it. I think the simple answer, the under-complex answer would be because these are completely different logics of operationalization. The economy with a long-term focus, you mentioned 100 years of operation in this country, with a shareholder-based approach, resulting in numbers at a market. And politicians, on the other hand, resulting in numbers in elections. And these are different dynamics, these are different spheres, these are different arenas. And therefore also the modus operandi of these different arenas is quite difficult and quite different. For us, of course, we have to merge all of these points of view as diplomats, because to us, our job is to create bridges, people to people, society to society, business to business, and government to governance. So it is very important to understand the corporate world. The corporate world is extremely helpful in understanding countries. Usually, if you talk to corporate interests, you get a very solid understanding of how a country works, what are the important benchmarks for the countries, what are the visions and aspirations, and what are the taboos about a country. And so for us as diplomats, the challenge is to be a bridge between these different visions that you have mentioned.
Thank you. I hope the panels have answered your questions, sir. Yeah, second questions. If anyone have any other question? Do you have any other questions that you'd like to ask the panel? While waiting for the floor to ask questions, maybe I can ask one. What should Malaysia do to balance between the business and also politics? Many say that it's uncertainty here. There's a distrust. So maybe you would want to answer. What should Malaysia do now to move forward? After staying here for a while, from an external perspective as a diplomat, I think we do not want to see Malaysia left behind, regionally, globally, especially in security issues as well. Although election is around the corner, we put aside, but Malaysia as a whole, what should they do? You want to start first?
I'm happy to start. This is for the Malaysians to decide in GE15. This is for elections to decide. The mandate is given to the people. And at some point in November, Malaysians will have the chance to cast their vote and decide which way to go. So this is the number one answer in my point of view in any democratic countries. Democratic countries have the unique capacity compared to authoritarian regimes to correct its course. So if the country might be going into what a certain part of the population considers to be a wrong direction, there comes election day, and democratic countries have these opportunities to redetermine which way to go. On a more concrete term, to not avoid answering your question, I would say, as a very basic principle, stick to what has made Malaysia great. Stick to the principles that have made this country very successful. Stick to the principles that the Sultan has pointed out when he was talking about enriching diversity, in making diversity a productive asset for the nation. And I'm not a lawyer, but I would add one additional element, also as a non-lawyer, always follow the Constitution. The Constitution is the accumulation of the principles guiding a country. So sticking to the constitutional principles would be another element that I would like to add.
Just to complete on what you said, Timo, and again, because I've been so little time here in Malaysia, I think the strength of the country is at the same time to have a capacity of dialogue in the region, dialogue inside the country with your different communities, and also a sense of a vision. You've had a vision, an economic vision, decisions after the independence that have been made to move on as an very clear objective, to move on for a development of the country, for its people. And I think, as Timo said, that Malaysia should stick to what has made it the country it is today. Every country not only wishes not to get back, and we have seen with the situation with COVID and the war, that it's always possible to have setbacks. You can have setbacks in development, you can have setbacks in the fight against poverty, the fight against illnesses. Some illnesses that we thought had disappeared are coming back. For example, in France, because I was talking this morning about biodiversity, the fact that the biodiversity is getting down means that there are more mosquitoes. Then we're having a problem of malaria in the south of France now, which is quite a new topic. What I'm saying is we have lots of new challenges, and all the countries are seeking not to recede, but to go forward for the best development of all the people. And I think His Royal Highness the Sultan talked about this morning. It's about bringing all the people together and all the people in the right direction, not leaving anyone behind, and working together. And I think these principles are, in my view, very important for all of us, as countries, as partners, as geographical or political blocks. Move forward, but with everybody. Don't leave anybody behind.
Thank you to both of you. Question? Yeah, please.
Hello. Anybody else? Mr. Dr. Siva.
Yeah.
I'm just asking because I'm giving a chance to others first. But if I can add, Mr. Guzman, there's something I would like to share with you in the 97 crisis. I frankly knew about 6 months earlier. Guys in Washington told me about this, but somehow politicians didn't believe what I said. I'm quite involved in Forex. I started the Kuala Lumpur Options and Financial Futures Exchange in this country. And I bought a German software, OTB. And also, I must acknowledge that during the crisis of 97, of all the banks that were looking at us, I must commend that the only bank that came to see me was the director of Bayerisch Landesbank with his wife. And that's wonderful. And also, if I can acknowledge, Bouygues SA, they even invited me to the Challenger, the office 45 minutes of Paris, because I told them I didn't take bribes. And they were very happy with it. So that's why, like I said, this is nostalgic. But my real intention of speaking now is that we are actually ready to move. And as I said, I'm not talking politics here. And USAS is very, our university is very, very, very open. In those sort of things, we have so many talents that need to be, not say cultivated, but where the knowledge are translated into creative works. And being an admirer of German technology, there are more companies that I've dealt with actually, and more banks in France too. But I don't want to lengthen the time to say it, but it's just my hope that both of your countries will continue to carry on with us. And I can assure you that, because I'm also, I used to be based in London, and I was in the World Council, the biggest accounting body representing 200 countries on governance. So we'll make sure that your companies are protected. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the comment. Anyone else? Question? Yes, please do. Can someone pass the mic?
Thank you. Not just to fill the vacuum, but I'm curious to know. I would like to ask your opinion, looking into your position as the ambassador. What's your opinion on Malaysia? Is Malaysia is a neutral country, from your opinion? Because we are very near to China, and though that we are also living in the value of the democracy. So what's your opinion on Malaysia? The key point is neutral. Thank you.
First, to correct, I'm no ambassador. I'm just chargé d'affaires, waiting for the new ambassador. On the word neutral, neutral is difficult, and not mentioning Malaysia, but the French president in the General Assembly of the United Nations has made a clear difference between the Cold War and the non-aligned countries being really non-aligned, and the actual situation where not taking sides can be understood in a different way. As for Malaysia, I think its position has been very clear in this respect, and the vote in the United Nations General Assembly, for example, of the non-recognition of the referenda organized by Russia, have been very clear, and Malaysia has voted, like the huge majority of countries, not to recognize what Russia has been trying to do. So this is not about neutrality, this is about values, and I think it was very clear when we both went to the ministry that the position of Malaysia in foreign relations was coherent and clear. Now, I was mentioning the word hedging because I went to a conference when I just arrived, and it was really interesting to see exactly what you're talking about, the geopolitics and the geography, and how you deal with your geography. Of course, every country has to deal with its neighbors, with its different regional areas in different ways, and Malaysia doesn't have to be neutral in the sense of not deciding for itself. Malaysia will choose the moments where it will have cooperation with a country, cooperation with another one, and things are not, we're not asking to decide, oh, if you work with the European Union on climate change, then you can't be working with China. No, we're all working with China on climate change because we all need that all the countries be involved. And of course, China, because it's a huge country, needs to be involved. So coming back on this, neutrality could be understood as not doing anything or not interfering with anyone. And I think, on the contrary, Malaysia has shown that in the ASEAN, for example, it was ready to make proposals and make proposals and solutions and be ready to work with the others. And we're really happy to be engaging with Malaysia in this way.
Malaysia has very clear principles for what it stands in foreign policy, and there are certain elements, for example, the fact that Malaysia is a majority Muslim country, of course has an influence on its foreign policy. Another part is that, of course, ASEAN is a cornerstone of Malaysia's foreign policy. There is a regional dynamics, there is a balance of regional dynamics that shapes Malaysia's foreign policy behavior. And what you have mentioned, the word neutrality, the way I understand the most recent foreign policy framework of Wisma Putra, actually the way I understand it is that non-alignment is the more important word. Malaysia, in many instances, is non-aligned, but not necessarily neutral. And that is not a contradiction. And these principles are very important, as Virginie has pointed out. The fact that non-alignment is a core principle of Malaysia's foreign policy DNA does not make it neutral, because when it comes to principles such as the upholding of the Charter of the United Nations, Malaysia was not neutral. Malaysia was on the side of international law and on the side of the Charter of United Nations. And in this sense, I would pass it back to you and would say non-alignment is probably the better word than neutral from my perspective.
Thank you, Timo. Can we move to another question? Maybe the last, before we conclude the last session today. No questions. The MC have moved to his rostrum. It's an indicator, actually. Okay, if there's no more questions, I shall conclude today's final session. I would say that there are differences, there are uncertainties, but of course, we must find ways to look at the differences and how to strengthen the differences, to celebrate the diversity that exists, and also to make sure that it doesn't become a liability, but rather than an asset, even for Asian or European. To thank both our panelists, let's give a round of applause, the normal way that we do, before I pass the mic to the MC. Thank you so much to Timo and Ms. Virginity. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to you.
Once again, we thank our distinguished panelists and honorable moderator for such an insightful session. And to the audience, thank you for your kind attention and patience.
مرة أخرى نشكر وشكرا جزيلا للمقدمين المتحدثين على تقديم رائع متميز ولا ننسى الشكر للجميع على حسن استماعكم وحضوركم.
We have finally come to the end of today's event. Our closing ceremony that will begin shortly will be led by our esteemed colleague, Mr. Katie Pillay. Katie, kindly proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's offer a big hand, ladies and gentlemen, to the two wonderful MCs. And back here once again, bigger, brighter, and bolder. Thank you. Please be patient as we move on to the final session for the whole World Conference on Islamic Thought. And this is an incredible time for us to sit back, relax, and ponder. Since the inception of WCIT in 2012, this is a series that has been a platform for both local and international scholars to engage in conversations and dialogues where socio-economic challenges and pragmatic solutions had been discussed from various perspectives. We have also the presence today of our eminent and renowned scholars, academicians, leaders, and practitioners who are willing to impart their experience, their thoughts, and their ideas with all of us. With that, ladies and gentlemen, for the closing address, it gives me great pleasure and honor to welcome the Vice Chancellor of University Sultan Azlan Shah to deliver the closing address. Let's welcome your bahagia, Tan Sri Dato Dr. Nordin bin Khalid. Tan Sri Prof. There you go, sir.
Alhamdulillah, bersyukur kita kehadrat Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala kerana dengan izinnya dapat kita bersama-sama menamatkan konferens pemikiran dan juga tamadun Islam yang ke-6 pada tahun ini 2022. Alhamdulillah, rakan-rakan hadirin sekalian kekal berada di dalam dewan menyebabkan kami sebagai penganjur merasa begitu gembira sekali. I was really enjoying the conference. WCIT, the 6th was supposed to be held in 2020. It was just a matter of few days before it was called off due to the pandemic COVID-19. And Alhamdulillah, today we managed to put this conference on stage with satisfying feelings on the organizers. Although it was only a day, and inshallah, based on what we have done today, the future WCIT will take a longer time, like two or 3 days like it was, and more sub-themes will be introduced. The sharing of humanity theme of this 6th World Conference on Islamic Thought in Civilization is intended to build on the work of previous WCIT conferences that hold on to the future. There has always been the word future attached to the theme of the conference, but today we were deliberating on the theme of sharing our humanity as our main theme. I believe that it mirrors our responsibility and obligation to create and sustain the world peace. And today, our colleagues, and thank you very much to our colleagues who work very hard to put many things in writing on paper. Some resolutions were captured by the organizing committee. One, for example, is the importance of addressing the 3 Ps of global peace, prosperity, and planet and its people. That was recorded as number 1. And number 2, the vital aspect of multiculturalism, harmony to maintain peace and shared humanity. And 3, the diversity and differences should be embraced with tolerance and understanding, with values of acceptance and mutual respect. And 4, unity as an essential factor to humanity, where if we recover together, we recover stronger. Number 5, ASEAN's role as the mediator and mediating ground could be amplified on the global scale. And number 6, The cure to the root cause of corruption and moral depravity lies in the collective movement involving all walks and layers of the society. The nation should come first, or probably the global interest should come first before self-interest. And number 8, the battle of the need versus greed. The setting of moral compass should be ingrained on the basis of upbringing. Number 9, each and every one of us has the responsibility to ensure a good governed society would be inherited by the future generation. And number 10, welfare should be well placed to help the intended group versus having a blanket policy that leads to inequality. 11, a modern statesman is expected to balance these 3 duties, namely nation building, state building, and national economy building for the greatest possible benefit. Lastly, the regional cooperation under stress should be more rigorous to deal with difficult uncertainties. And with that, WCIT 2022 aims to explore the philosophy and the strategies for harmony and political stability for communities, to express the various social and political expectations of each other, and for the panelists to express and share their personal experiences and knowledge in dealing with good global conflict, and to offer strategies in conflict resolution, which I think it has been addressed very, very well. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, even the tight schedule that we had for WCIT 2022 today, where everything needs to be compressed into one-day session, I believe that we have managed to deliberate on the proposed theme, sharing our humanity. And worry not, the hard-working organizing committee, led by our remarkable conference director, Professor Dato Wan Sabri. Can you please introduce yourself? And I should also mention a few more. Zurul, who is working very hard, who was working until today, who was heading the secretariat. Yeah, he's over there. And my other colleagues who have been working very, very hard for several months to put this conference on stage. It is my great pleasure to congratulate each and everyone for you for making WCIT 2022 a success. And on behalf of the university, the board of directors, and also the big community of USAS, the organizing committee, I would like to extend our sincerest thanks and gratitude to our speakers and moderators for the insightful session and fruitful deliberation. To all participants, thank you for your time and presence. To the organizing committee again, under the direction of, as I said, Professor Dr. Wan, congratulations again for the success of the conference. With that, this marks the conclusion of WCIT 2022, and thank you very much. God willing, we'll see you again in the future. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Jutaan, terima kasih. Very big thank you to Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Dato Dr. Nordin bin Kadi. He is the Honorable Vice Chancellor of University Sultan Azlan Shah, for sharing with us the whole in-depth of what happened today. So incredible. The detailed summary and the conclusion, which is so great and nice to hear. So once again, can you all please offer yourself a big clap, USAS style. Thank you very much. Today, I'm all prepared, ladies and gentlemen, to have a review of what happened. But definitely the job was done by the Vice Chancellor. Thank you, sir. That is the tough part. So, as a conclusion today, ladies and gentlemen, let me just share with you something that I thought of when I was sitting at the back. That is, in life, we need to aspire to inspire each other, not perspire before we expire in our life journey. That's number one. Number two, We have to be positive about COVID, but don't be COVID positive. COVID is a positive word because COVID stands for COVID, turning challenges and obstacles into victory that require innovation and determination. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to focus, for us to move on, because everything happened for a reason. It's time for us to re-energize and look forward in tandem with this. WCIT today, if we take home only 30% of the knowledge, good enough, because we have to be positive every day, thinking what we can do together for us to be there. As for me, my last words for all of you is something very nice. It's the greatest pleasure without pressure that I will treasure beyond measure in my leisure. It's been a wonderful, interesting event, ladies and gentlemen. I have learned today this is something really interesting, but some great news also. I would like to mention that the refreshments, coffee and tea, has been served for you right at the end of this walkway, right to the glass door. That is number one. Number two, before you leave, please ensure that you have checked that all your handphones, your belongings are taken before we leave. I've spoken to Mr. Hussein, or Brother Hussein. He told me WCIT, looking forward to happen in the year 2024. And I, ladies and gentlemen, will be waiting patiently for the day to come to once again hope to be your host. And of course, to Madame Regine, all I can say is au revoir and bon voyage. We hope you have a great trip back to France, because in a few years I learned a bit about French, like je m'appelle Katie, je ne parle pas français, je parle anglais. Merci beaucoup. And of course, Timo, Dankeschön. Thank you very much, sir. Here, Timo. This is truly incredible event. Siwa, there you go. Siong Murugan Pandian, ladies and gentlemen. If you happen to see him and myself, we are brothers from different fathers. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Truly an incredible evening. It's been a wonderful effect for us. But before you leave, make sure you meet and greet, exchange handphone numbers, network, because network is better than net worth. So because when you network, your net worth will go higher. This is truly very important. With that, terima kasih. Thank you. Terima kasih. Stay healthy, stay happy, pray for world peace, and we see you again, WCIT, with you from now moving forward stronger, bigger, brighter, and better. Thank you. I also wish to thank a very special person I just saw. The Honorable Dato Muhammad Zahir Abdul Khalid is here. This is truly incredible. Big hand, ladies and gentlemen, to our great VIP, sir. I just saw you, the great Parastate Assembly Speaker. I am shocked to see you, sir. Thank you very much. Terima kasih, of course, to the chairman. This is here this evening. Terima kasih to, of course, all of you here. Ladies and gentlemen, we see you soon. Take care and bye-bye. Jangan lupa, pada mereka yang ingin minum kopi dan teh sedikit, jangan lupa untuk bersama-sama ke hujung perjalanan di sini. Di depan koridor gelas itu ada minuman dan makanan-makanan ringan yang telah pun disediakan. Terima kasih kepada sekalian dan kita jumpa lagi. We can't go on pretending day by day that someone somehow will soon make a change. We are all a part of